Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Travis Harker, and before any of this started, I worked 12-hour shifts in an ambulance that covered more road miles than most people would believe. I was a paramedic in central Georgia, based out of a county service area east of Macon, the kind of place where a call might send you down a state highway, then onto a cracked two-lane county road, then onto red clay driveways between pine stands and old fields. I knew what panic looked like before the outbreak. I had seen it after tornado warnings, after highway pileups, after house fires. After a summer storm knocked out power for half the county and every gas station had a line wrapped around the building by sunrise. Panic did not make people kinder. It made them louder, faster, and less predictable. It made decent people do ugly math. That is the part I understood before everyone else did. The land where I built my shelter belonged to my family once, back when my grandfather raised hay and kept a few head of cattle on 80 acres in Twiggs County. By the time it came to me, there was no real farm left. The pastures had gone rough around the edges. One fence line had collapsed into the brush, and the old equipment shed leaned like it was tired of standing. But the property still had the things that matter when you want to disappear. It had a tree line that broke up sight lines from the road. It had low ground with a creek bed that only held water after rain. It had a narrow access trail that looked more like an overgrown utility cut than a driveway. And most important, it had no close neighbors who cared enough to check on it unless they had a reason. I did not build the shelter because I was preparing for the dead to start walking. I built it because I had spent too many nights watching systems fail in slow motion. A bad storm, a chemical spill on Interstate 16, a train blocking crossings for hours, dispatch overloaded, fuel deliveries behind schedule, pharmacies closed, cell towers jammed. I had seen how thin the line was between normal life and a crowd fighting over bottled water in a store aisle. Most people thought collapse would look dramatic and sudden. My experience taught me it would probably look administrative first. Delays, confusion, rumors, contradictory instructions. Too many people trusting that someone else had a plan. I wanted one place in the world where I did not have to ask permission to survive. So I built it over almost 3 years, one weekend at a time, paying cash when I could, spreading out deliveries, telling almost nobody anything useful. I already had a reputation in the family for being private, which helped. After my divorce and after my father died, people got used to me keeping my own company. I let them think the county land was my place to deer hunt and get away from work. That cover story did more for me than any camouflage net ever could. The shelter itself was small by design. I did not want a bunker because bunkers attract fantasies, and fantasies get people killed. I wanted something hidden, dry, hard to spot, and easy to manage alone. I set it into a rise just beyond the old hayfield where young pines had started reclaiming the ground. From a distance, the front looked like part of a neglected utility storage mound, especially after I dirted over the roofline, seeded it with scrub grass, and dragged deadfall into the area so it looked naturally cluttered. The entrance sat behind a false wall inside what had once been a simple pole barn storage bay. From the outside, the shed still looked ordinary enough. Weathered metal roof, patched siding, a stack of old pallets, one rusting rotary cutter, 2 empty drums, some lengths of bent fence post. Inside, behind shelves of worthless junk and a plywood partition, was an inward-opening steel door bolted into a reinforced frame. Past that came a short cinder-block vestibule, then an inner security door with a deadbolt and a slide bar. That second door was the one that mattered. If the outer space was compromised, I still had one more barrier. If somebody forced the first entrance, they hit a narrow kill space where they could not move well, could not see much, and could not rush me in numbers. I hate that I thought that way. I hated it when I was building it too. But I built it anyway. The living space behind the inner door was simple. 12 feet wide, 24 feet long, poured slab floor, insulated walls, sealed storage, bunk on one side, workbench on the other, shelves for food and medical supplies, a fold-down table, batteries, inverter, radio equipment, a small wood stove with careful venting, and a backup propane cook setup I rarely planned to use unless I had to. Water came from a hand pump tied into a shallow well point I had driven and concealed under the shed floor, with multiple filtration stages and treated reserves stored inside. The electrical system was modest. Roof panels hidden at angles on the rear tree line feeding a battery bank through buried conduit. Nothing flashy, just enough for lights, communications, charging, ventilation fans, and small tools. I kept everything repairable by hand. If a system needed a specialist, it did not belong in there. And there was one rule: no one else gets in. I said it out loud the first night I slept there after finishing the inner door. I remember that because the place still smelled like cured concrete dust, pine boards, and machine oil. I sat on the bunk with a flashlight in my hand and said the rule like I was swearing an oath to an empty church. No visitors. No exceptions. It sounds cruel when you hear it plain. It sounded cruel then, too. But I had reasons, and in my head they were good reasons. One person I trust becomes two people I have to feed. 2 becomes 3 when somebody brings a spouse. 3 becomes 5 when somebody says there's a kid involved. Then word spreads. Then your hidden shelter is not hidden anymore. Then the whole point of building it is gone. Stability first, guilt later. That was how I justified it. A harsh rule is easier to keep than a soft one. You do not negotiate with yourself at 3 in the morning if the answer is already no. The few weapons I kept there were practical and legal. I owned a pump-action 12-gauge with an 18.5-inch barrel, mostly because in rural Georgia it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and because simple tools are more reliable than complicated ones when your hands are shaking. I had a basic handgun I carried off duty sometimes and locked away the rest of the time. I had no interest in building an armory or pretending I was some lone wolf war hero. Real emergencies are mostly logistics, maintenance, rest, and decisions you wish somebody else had to make. Still, I kept the shotgun cleaned, secured, and where I could reach it as a last resort. Not a first choice, a last resort. That mattered to me then, it matters to me now. The outbreak did not begin with one dramatic moment on my end. It arrived the way bad things often do in emergency medicine, as a pattern before it became a headline. The first hints showed up in dispatch chatter and handoff notes from hospital staff who looked more irritated than alarmed. Confused patients, sudden agitation, individuals becoming combative without the usual profile, families saying somebody had been fine that morning and impossible by evening. There were rumors online, of course, but there are always rumors online. I ignored most of them. Then I stopped ignoring them when too many pieces lined up in the wrong way. One shift in late August, we got sent to a single-vehicle crash off a county road south of Jeffersonville. Caller reported a pickup in a ditch and the driver acting crazy. That phrase covers a lot of ground in my line of work. Drugs, head injury, diabetic emergency, psychiatric crisis, fear, alcohol, heat exposure. We rolled expecting one of those. Instead, we found a man in his late 40s wandering in circles near the truck with blood on his shirt that did not seem to belong to him. He was unsteady but strong, hot to the touch, nonverbal in any meaningful way, and violently resistant to help. His pupils reacted. His airway was clear. Respirations fast but not labored. No obvious penetrating injuries. Deep abrasions on one forearm, torn skin around the hand like he had gone through windshield glass or barbed wire. He kept trying to grab at us and at his own face, not in a pain response exactly, more like he was trying to peel off something only he could feel. We requested law enforcement early. We almost never do that unless the scene needs it, and that scene needed it. The deputy got there, we sedated the patient after a struggle I still remember in my shoulders, and we transported him under restraint because there was no safe alternative. At the emergency department, I gave report to a nurse I knew by name, and she cut me off halfway through to ask if this was another one. Another one. That phrase stayed with me all day. Another one from where? Another one how many? By the end of that week, the emergency room in Macon was working at a strain you could feel in the hallways. Security staff at entrances, waiting rooms too full, administration moving with that fake calm hospitals use when nobody wants to start panic before leadership gives permission. We still did our jobs. We still ran calls. Falls, chest pain, dehydration, a child with an asthma flare, an older man with sepsis, a woman in labor who was more annoyed than scared. Life keeps happening while the larger thing arrives. That was one of the worst parts. Nobody gets to pause. Then came the videos. Not the fake ones, the real ones. You learn to tell the difference if you work around crisis long enough. The real ones have bad angles, confused voices, missing context, and details nobody would bother inventing. They showed people in hospital parking lots, roadside incidents, gas station confrontations, holding areas outside clinics, and more than once, healthcare workers backing away from a patient who should not have been standing. Nothing supernatural, nothing theatrical. Just too many incidents of people not behaving like injured or sick people usually behave, and too many of them becoming dangerous after they should have been exhausted. The state response lagged behind the speed of rumor. Local officials urged calm. Hospitals shifted protocols. Law enforcement presence increased at some public buildings. Schools started sending messages about temporary closures. Stores got hit in waves. Water first, then batteries, canned food, fuel cans, pet food, toilet paper, because for some reason, modern panic always circles back to toilet paper. Folks lined up at the hardware store for generators they had no idea how to run safely. I saw fights almost start over plywood. I saw 3 families at one pump line argue about whose emergency mattered more. That was before anybody around me was saying the word outbreak out loud with conviction. But I already knew where this was going. I had built my shelter for the day the systems around me would become untrustworthy. That day had arrived. I went home after a shift that felt twice as long as it should have been and made a list. Not a dramatic last stand list, just a practical one. Controlled substances and specialized equipment from work were not mine and would stay where they belonged. But my own trauma kit, personal tools, durable clothing, family documents, backup radios, batteries, cash, maps, food from my house, and a few items from my mother's place all needed to move. I lived in a rental outside Dry Branch then, close enough to make the drive to Macon and far enough to keep my expenses low. The house had never meant much to me. It was a place to sleep between shifts. The shelter was different. That was the place I had designed to hold under pressure. I did not tell coworkers my full plan. A few of them were talking openly about heading to relatives, cabins, lakes, church properties, anywhere they believed they could ride it out. One guy I knew from a neighboring crew said he and 3 friends were pooling supplies and taking over a hunting lodge near the Ekmulgee River. He wanted me to come. I told him no. He called me stubborn. He was right. I made one call before I left town. My brother, Wade, did not answer. We had not spoken properly in almost a year by then. Estranged makes it sound dramatic and clean. It was not. It was years of small resentments that hardened into separate lives. Wade was older than me by 6 years and had spent most of his adult life proving that nobody could tell him what to do, even when what they wanted him to do was obviously in his own best interest. He had worked roofing, then diesel repair, then county public works for a while, then odd jobs, then nothing steady. He had a good heart and a terrible sense of momentum. If life gave him one stable thing, he somehow found a way to lean sideways until it broke. He also had a habit of disappearing when the rest of us needed him and reappearing when he needed something. Our last real argument had been after our mother's surgery, when I took unpaid time to help her. Wade showed up late, loud, defensive, and half ready to make his guilt everybody else's problem. Harsh words were said. Mine were not the worst, but they were final enough. Still, I called him. No answer. I called my mother next. She was staying with my aunt in Dublin for a few weeks because it was easier on her knees and because my aunt liked having company. She picked up on the second ring. I told her not to come home for any reason. Not for the dogs, not for mail, not for anything left in the freezer, and to listen carefully, stay inside, keep vehicles fueled, fill every container with water, lock doors even in daylight. Do not open for strangers. Do not trust rumors about aid distribution unless it came from a source she knew personally. If Wade called, tell him to get off main roads and get somewhere he could secure, even if only for 48 hours. She heard my voice and asked the one question I did not want to answer. Is it that bad? Yes, I said. She was quiet a second. Are you going to the land? Yes. All right, she said, then go. My mother has never wasted words when she knows words will not change anything. I loaded through the night. Fuel cans first because those become currency the moment stability slips. Then water, dry goods, medical bags, batteries, hand tools, tarps, chain, rolls of wire, spare filters, bleach, soap, canned meat, rice, oats, coffee, salt, and every box of ammunition I already legally owned and had no reason to leave in a rental house. I made 2 trips, maybe 3, depending on whether you count the stop at the county land gate where I got out and stood in the dark listening before driving in. That is something people who have never had to secure a place do not understand. Every arrival starts with stillness. You sit with the engine off. You listen for engines, footsteps, voices, metal noise, dogs, generator hum, anything that does not belong. Only then do you move. By sunrise, I was inside the shelter with the inner door barred, writing inventory on a legal pad and telling myself I had made the right choice. Outside, the county was changing by the hour. For the first 2 days, I still monitored radio traffic and limited phone use. Cell service held, then faltered, then came back in patches, then became unreliable enough that every call felt like luck. I heard enough to understand the shape of events. More roadblocks, more calls for assistance than units available. Deputies tied up on domestic violence, looting, missing persons, wrecks, disorderly crowds, unknown medical incidents, and false reports layered on top of real ones. Emergency rooms overrun. Volunteer fire departments responding shorthanded because some members were dealing with their own families and properties. You could hear fatigue entering people's voices before you heard fear. Fatigue comes first in professionals. Fear shows up later, usually when the rules stop matching reality. At noon on the second day, I drove one last time into town because there were 2 things I did not yet have enough of: diesel stabilizer and livestock feed for the small number of animals I had decided to keep on site as an alarm more than a food source. I regret that trip more than almost anything else, not because I got hurt, but because it showed me exactly what people become when they stop believing normal order will return. Jeffersonville was not war-torn. It was worse in a quieter way. It looked half normal. Some businesses shuttered, some open, traffic moving in spurts, People in parking lots talking too intensely, everyone looking over everyone else's shoulder. The farm supply store had a line out front and a manager at the door, only letting people in by count. The gas station down the road had paper signs taped over the pumps. Cash only, regular limit 10 gallons. The Dollar General lot was chaos. Somebody had backed into a cart return and left the bumper dragging. A sheriff's unit rolled through slow with lights but no siren. Nobody looked reassured. I got what I came for and no more. A case of batteries, 2 feed sacks, stabilizer, a box of heavy contractor trash bags, and a pair of work gloves. I saw 3 people I knew and pretended not to. One of them saw me anyway. It was a man named Curtis who did HVAC work and hunted on land not too far from my family's place. He walked up fast, smiling too hard, eyes frantic. Asked where I was staying, asked if I had power, asked if I had heard anything solid about National Guard support. I lied without hesitation. Told him I was heading toward my mother's aunt's place with everybody else. Said I did not know anything. Said I was just trying to keep my head down. He looked disappointed in me for not being more useful. That was when I knew the rule had to hold. Because even decent men under strain start measuring what you can offer. I got back to the land before dusk and changed my outer approach. I cut fresh tire marks elsewhere on the property to create false use patterns. I dragged brush across the real path and began using a longer concealed route on foot from a parked truck hidden under a camo net farther out. I strung barbed wire in places where it did not show easily from a distance, but would slow anyone moving in a hurry through the brush. Not prison yard fencing. Just enough to force caution, snag clothing, and buy me seconds. I put noise traps where a person could not avoid brushing them if they approached from the most likely blind side. Old cans, washers, short lengths of chain, fishing line, nothing cinematic, only simple warning. Around the shed interior, I kept the space clean, organized, and quiet. Panic loves clutter. So does exhaustion. Then I settled into a pattern. Morning system check, water, ventilation, battery status, exterior observation through narrow concealed points, radio monitoring, food prep, maintenance tasks, midday rest if possible, late-day perimeter walk only if necessary and only after a full listen from cover. No fires outside. No visible light leaks after dark. No unnecessary noise, every movement with a purpose. A week in, I started feeling something I had not expected. Relief. Not joy, not safety exactly, but relief. The shelter was working. I was ahead of the curve while the outside world fell behind it. I had food, clean water, layered security, power, medical supplies, and a routine. Routine is the skeleton of survival. Without it, your mind starts making bad trades. You stay up too late, eat too much, ignore small repairs, skip cleaning, stop writing things down, convince yourself you will remember later. Later never remembers as well as paper does. On the radio, I heard less official traffic and more civilian chatter. Some of it was nonsense. Some of it was useful. Churches opening doors, then closing them after trouble. People trying to organize neighborhood watches. People reporting groups moving house to house asking for water, then fuel, then entry. Wild claims about federal aid convoys that never arrived. Reports of patients leaving overwhelmed hospitals and wandering roads. That part I believed because I had already seen the system strain from inside. A hospital can be the strongest building in a county until it becomes the most dangerous one. Too many sick people, too many scared families, too many exhausted staff, too few secure exits. Once order breaks there, it breaks hard. I did not go looking for other survivors. I did not patrol. I did not play sheriff over the surrounding woods. Staying alive alone is already a full-time job. People who think they will become leaders in a collapse have usually never tried to maintain a water system with dirty hands and 4 hours of sleep. Around day 10, I made the mistake of watching the property line too long. There was a family on the county road. A man and woman with 2 children, one pulling a suitcase with a broken wheel and the other carrying a stuffed animal by one arm. They were too far to hear from the shelter, and I was looking through binoculars from concealment. But even at that distance, I knew what the body language meant. The adults were done. Not injured, maybe, but emptied out. The man kept turning to look behind them. The woman never did. She was conserving all her energy for forward motion. They cut past the far side of my property without seeing any sign of me. I stayed hidden and watched them go. I told myself I had done the right thing. If I revealed the shelter to one family, I might condemn us all. That argument works cleanly in your head until you have to eat dinner afterward. On day 12, I got my first direct test. A vehicle came down the old access line just after noon, slow and sloppy, branches scraping the sides. I heard it before I saw it and moved into position behind the inner door with the outer shed area on a narrow camera feed. It was a county pickup, white once, caked with dust now. One flat tire riding on a rim. Driver's door opening, then staying open. A man stepped out and looked around with the unsteady focus of someone near the end of a long push. I knew him. Dale Mercer. Volunteer firefighter, occasional hay baler, the kind of man who would help pull a stranger's truck from mud and never mention it again. Good man, mid-50s, widower. Lived alone with 2 hounds and too many old tractors. I had treated him once for heat stress and once for a chainsaw cut that looked worse than it was. He shouted my name. Not loud at first, then louder. Travis, I know this is your family place. My stomach dropped, but not from surprise. From the proof that secrecy is never absolute. He did not know where the shelter was. He knew only that I used the property. That was enough to be dangerous. He called again, said he needed water and somewhere to rest for one night. Said he had been turned away at 2 houses. Said people were sick in town and he had seen things he could not explain. Said he was alone. I stayed silent. He walked the shed perimeter once, not finding anything. Then he sat on the tailgate, elbows on knees, and just breathed for a while. It would have been easier if he had looked like a threat. He looked tired and ashamed to be asking. After 10 minutes, he stood, took a bottle from the truck, found it empty, threw it into the bed in frustration and shouted again, this time with anger under the fear. "You hear me, then answer me." I still said nothing. He stayed almost an hour. When he finally left, I watched the pickup lurch back towards the road on the ruined tire, and I told myself silence had saved my life. That night, I did not sleep much, because the truth was I had not stayed silent out of pure wisdom. Part of me had stayed silent because answering would have made me accountable for what came next. Silence lets you pretend the decision made itself. 3 days later, there was smoke to the west after dark. Not a wildfire. Too controlled, too intermittent. Somebody burning debris or trying to signal. The next morning, I walked a far perimeter and found fresh footprints at my north line. At least 2 people, maybe 3, not moving with purpose toward the shelter but moving through the area. I shifted some stores, rechecked the noise traps, and changed where I slept inside the room so no one could predict a silhouette through the wrong angle. Small adjustments. Necessary adjustments. My world had shrunk to the radius of decisions I could sustain. Then Wade came. It was near sundown on day 19. I remember the hour because the light in South Georgia gets flat and yellow before it drops, and the pines start looking like bars in the distance. I had just finished filtering an extra water batch when I heard something in the outer brush line that was too irregular to be deer and too quiet to be a vehicle. Human movement trying not to sound human. I killed the interior lights and moved to observation. What I saw first was not Wade. It was the kid. A teenager, maybe 15 or 16, slight frame, dark sweatshirt tied around the waist, moving with the stiff caution of somebody running on fumes. Then Wade stepped into view behind the teenager, one hand pressed to his side, beard overgrown, face drawn, cap gone, shirt dirty, left sleeve dark with dried blood and road grime. He was thinner than I had ever seen him. He looked 10 years older than when I last saw him, and somehow still unmistakably himself in the way he scanned, paused, and squared his shoulders against pain as if stubbornness could do the work of strength. He saw the shed and headed straight for it. Of all the outcomes I had prepared for, this was the one I had rehearsed only in theory and never believed would actually happen. Not because I thought Wade could not find the property, he knew the land well enough from childhood, but because I thought his pride would keep him away until it was too late, or because I assumed our distance would matter more to him than blood when things got ugly. I was wrong. He knocked on the outer structure wall first, then called my name once, low and controlled. Travis. He did not shout again immediately. He knew better. He knew if I was here, I was armed, alert, and making calculations. The teenagers swayed on their feet and sat down hard on an old cinder block near the shed opening. Wade called again. "I know you're here." I kept the inner position and said nothing. He waited maybe 10 seconds, then spoke in the voice I remembered from years ago when he used to tell me not to flinch before diving into a creek from the rope swing. "I'm not alone." As if I could not already see that. He lifted his empty hands a little away from his body. "I'm hurt, and she's done." She. So the teenager was a girl. He took a careful breath like it hurt more than he wanted to show. "I'm not asking for everything." The fact that he said that first told me he knew exactly what my rule would be. I still said nothing. Then the girl spoke, and her voice changed the shape of the moment because it was not pleading. It was embarrassed. "Sir, I can sit outside, I just need water." No crying, no drama, just the plain statement of somebody too exhausted to bargain hard. My mind split in two right there. One side was pure structure. You built this place for exactly this moment. Entry means contamination risk, resource drain, information leakage, emotional compromise. Injury means infection risk. Unknown teenager means unknown background, unknown exposure, unknown loyalties. Even Wade is unstable in a crisis, especially Wade. Open the door and the rule dies forever. The other side was memory. Wade teaching me to throw a line into the pond behind our grandfather's house. Wade putting a hand on my shoulder at our father's funeral because neither of us knew what to say. Wade taking a punch for me in high school and then laughing about it with blood on his lip like it had been worth the price. Wade at his worst, yes, but Wade still. And beside him, a kid who had somehow ended up trusting him enough to follow him this far. I said the first thing that came into my head. A step back from the wall. Wade exhaled once. Not relief, more like acknowledgement that the game had at least started. He moved back 3 paces, guiding the girl with him. I stayed behind cover and spoke through the concealed vent opening that carried sound better than the door itself. What happened? "Monroe County line yesterday morning," he said. "Truck trouble first, then trouble with people. Then I got cut on wire and banged up climbing a fence. She was with a group outside a church shelter that broke apart. I found her after dark." "Found her how?" "She was hiding under a trailer." "Name?" I asked. The girl answered for herself. "Alyssa." "How old are you, Alyssa?" 16? "Any bites?" "No, sir." "Any fever?" "I don't think so." "You think so, or you know so?" "I know so." I asked Wade the same questions, harsher than I needed to. He gave short answers. No to anything obvious. The injury at his side turned out to be a deep bruise and laceration from going over rusted fencing and landing wrong. The left forearm had barbed wire cuts. He said he had cleaned them once with bottled water and once with liquor, which sounded exactly like Wade's style of medicine and made me angry enough to forget fear for a second. "How did you find this place?" I asked. He gave a tired little laugh that carried no humor. "You think I forgot where Granddad used to park the hay rake?" He was right. Of course he was right. We both knew every contour of that land from childhood. The only reason he had not found the actual shelter yet was because I had changed enough of the visible approach that he still thought in terms of the old shed, not the hidden structure behind it. The girl nearly slid off the block where she was sitting. That decided the next 10 minutes whether I wanted it to or not. I opened the outer door only after making them back up farther and only with the shotgun visible but down, not raised. The sight of it hit Wade harder than I expected. Not fear, recognition. This was not his little brother borrowing tools anymore. This was the man behind the rule made visible. He looked at the gun, then at me, then away. Up close, he was in worse shape than his voice suggested. Not dying, not immediately, but dehydrated, drained, and carrying pain the way only stubborn men do, by acting like pain belongs to someone else. Alyssa looked dusty, underfed, and scraped up, with one ankle wrapped in a filthy strip of t-shirt. No obvious severe trauma, eyes clear, alert, too alert for a kid her age. She had been afraid for too long. I handed out water first and watched how they drank. You can tell a lot from that. Both controlled themselves. Neither lunged nor begged for more. Good sign. Then I made them sit on overturned buckets in the outer shed bay while I stayed between them and the inner wall. I checked Wade's wounds under flashlight. The wire cuts were dirty but manageable. The side wound was ugly looking but mostly superficial over a broad bruise. Possible cracked rib. He flinched when I palpated near the lower edge. "Nothing feels broken where I need it not to be," he muttered. "That is not how anatomy works," I said. Alyssa almost smiled at that. I cleaned what I could in the outer area with saline, antiseptic, clean dressings, and gloves. I was not taking them inside yet. Maybe not ever. I told myself that while I worked. Wade let me treat him with the same silence he used to wear when he knew he had lost an argument but did not plan to admit it. Alyssa answered questions better than he did. She had been with her mother and stepfather in a church fellowship hall outside Forsyth where people thought numbers meant safety. Food ran low. Tempers rose. One sick man in a side room became a problem. Then two more. Then fear did what fear does. Some left early, some tried to lock others out, some fought over vehicles. In the confusion, Alyssa got separated after her mother told her to run. She had not seen either parent since. Wade found her hiding behind an equipment trailer at a closed landscaping yard. He claimed he almost kept walking. "I believe that," I said without looking up. He took that as the insult it was meant to be. I almost kept walking because she had a better chance hidden than moving with me. "That true?" I asked Alyssa. She nodded. He told me to stay. Then he came back. That I believed too. When the dressings were done and they had both eaten crackers, peanut butter, and canned peaches like people who had almost forgotten how to eat something slowly, the real decision stood in front of me. Night was coming. Letting them leave would be a sentence, maybe not immediate, but likely enough. Letting them remain in the outer shed unsecured carried its own risks. Bringing them inside crossed the line I had drawn years earlier. Wade saw it in my face. "You don't have to let us in," he said. But the way he said it was wrong. It was not noble. It was defensive already, as if he had prepared to hate me for the answer. Alyssa kept her eyes down. I hated them both a little in that moment for making me the judge of something I had built my whole life to avoid having to judge. That was unfair. I know it was unfair, But emergency decisions are full of unfair emotions. I told them they could stay in the outer bay for one night, no farther. I would set cots, water, and a bucket latrine. The inner door stayed locked. At first light, we would reassess. Wade started to argue, probably out of reflex, and I shut him down with one look. That first night with them, 10 feet and 2 walls away, was the longest night I had spent in the shelter since the outbreak began. Every sound meant something again. Fabric shifting, coughing, bucket scrape, quiet voices. I kept the shotgun next to the bunk and hated that too. Not because I expected Wade to attack me. Because I had allowed a situation where such a thought now had to exist in the room at all. Morning came gray and humid after a weak rain. I opened the outer section in stages. Alyssa was awake first, sitting upright on the cot with the kind of posture kids get when adults have disappointed them too many times. Wade slept in short, painful stretches, one arm over his ribs. His color looked better. Not good. Better. I made coffee and did not offer any until after the security checks. That sounds cold, but procedure steadies people. Food and caffeine come after rules. I took Alyssa's temperature, normal. Wade's too. Elevated but not alarming. And understandable given stress and injury. I changed dressings. No sign of anything unusual beyond dirt and neglect. I asked direct questions again. Exposure, symptoms, contact with people acting violently ill. Both answers were messy because by then almost everyone had crossed paths with somebody concerning at some point. There was no clean quarantine standard left, only probability and judgment. Then I made what felt like a compromise and what eventually turned out to be a surrender. I moved them inside under conditions. One corner only. Bedding assigned. Boot wash at entry. Hand wash mandatory. No touching stores without permission. No opening doors. No approaching me while I slept. No discussing the location with anyone if they ever left. No fires, no signals, no outside trips without me. If either of them showed concerning symptoms, the arrangement changed immediately. Alyssa agreed before I finished speaking. Wade listened, jaw tight, as if every condition was a personal insult. "Say it," I told him. He stared at me. "Say what?" "That you understand." He held my gaze a second longer than necessary. "I understand." I opened the inner door and let them cross the line. Nothing visible changed in that instant. The room did not become warmer or smaller in a physical sense. But my shelter stopped being the place I had built in theory and became a place I had to share in reality. There's a difference between designing for control and living with compromise. Every shelf looked different once other eyes were on it. Every ration became arithmetic instead of reassurance. The first 48 hours with them inside were ugly in small ways. Wade wanted to help before he could stand long enough to be useful. I did not trust him near systems he had not built. He took that personally. Alyssa tried to make herself invisible, which somehow made me more protective of her and more annoyed at the situation at the same time. The room felt crowded with 3 people in it, though it had been built precisely to hold that number in theory. Theory does not snore, ask questions, or flinch awake from bad dreams. But then usefulness started to win. Alyssa learned quickly, faster than most adults would have. She learned water discipline, battery rotation, radio logging, how to keep wrappers from piling up, how to wash with almost no waste, how to move quietly in a small space, how to ask before touching tools. Wade, once the pain eased, proved unexpectedly good at reinforcement work I had postponed. He helped improve the false interior wall in the shed, strengthened one outer hinge with scavenged plate steel I had lying around, and rigged a better rain diversion on the shed roof so runoff would stop creating a telltale soft patch near one side after storms. Working together almost made us look like brothers again, which was dangerous because it tempted me to think old wounds had healed themselves. They had not. Shared labor can hide a fracture, it does not mend it automatically. 3 days after they came in, we had our first fight. It started over a radio transmission. A weak voice on civilian band. A woman saying there were injured people at an elementary school being used as a community refuge, and they needed antibiotics, clean dressings, and anyone with medical training. The school was not close, but not impossible either if roads were passable. I listened, head down, taking in call signs, repeated pleas, location clues, all of it. Wade watched me from the workbench. "You're thinking about going," he said. "No," I answered, "you're lying." "I'm calculating." "To what end?" "To survive." He stood too fast, winced, and kept going. "You were a paramedic last month." "I still know how to be one." "Then act like it." That made me angrier than it should have because it cut straight through the identity I had been holding apart to make the shelter work. Out there, help everybody you can until the call volume buries you. In here, help only if it does not destroy the position. Both felt true. Only one was sustainable. You think because I have bandages and training I can roll out there and save a school full of people? I said. With what transport? With what security? With what guarantee they don't follow me back? You want to trade 3 lives for a maybe? He said the words I'd been trying not to hear for myself. You built this place to avoid choosing. That was unfair and close enough to true to sting. Alyssa froze where she was sorting canned goods. I told Wade to sit down or get out of my way. He did neither. The argument got louder. Old grievances came in through the side door like they had been waiting in the hall. Our mother. My divorce. His drinking. My judgment. His unreliability. My control. It had almost nothing to do with the radio call by the end. That is how family works under pressure. The real subject only gets the first minute. Finally, Alyssa said quietly but firmly, "Both of you stop." We both did. Not because we were mature, because hearing a 16-year-old have to speak to us like that was humiliating enough to break the loop. The radio transmission faded and did not come back. I still think about that school. I do not know if anyone there made it. I do know this. After the argument, the shelter felt unstable in a new way. Not structurally, morally. Once more than one conscience lives in a room, every rule becomes political. A week later, the outside came to us again. It was mid-morning. Heat already rising. I was checking a perimeter angle through the concealed view slit when I saw 2 men moving along the east tree line with the kind of loose confidence that comes from believing nobody is watching. One had a backpack and a pry bar. The other carried a rifle slung carelessly. Hunting rifle, wood stock, not shouldered, not ready. They were not desperate walkers passing through, they were searching. Maybe they had followed sign. Maybe they were working property to property. Maybe someone had seen Wade or heard a vehicle somewhere days earlier. The reason did not matter. They were inside the area where accidents turn into discoveries. I signaled Wade and Alyssa to silence. They both went still immediately. Good. I monitored while the men moved closer to the shed, pausing to look for fuel, equipment, anything worth taking. One kicked an old drum. The other peered through a crack in the outer siding. Wade whispered, "Curtis and Leon." I looked at him. He nodded. Leon's brother-in-law has land west of here. So, Curtis from the supply store had not forgotten me after all. That made my mistake clear in hindsight. One conversation in a parking lot. One man seeing I had a direction even if I lied about it. One chain of assumptions. In collapse, people investigate their assumptions. The men circled slowly. They were not panicked. That made them more dangerous. Panicked people sometimes scare off. Methodical people keep going. They found the shed door unlocked because I had left the outermost section looking exactly careless enough to seem abandoned. That bought us nothing now. They stepped into the outer bay. I had prepared for intruders, but preparation on paper does not cancel the reality of hearing boots where boots should not be. One of them said, "Told you somebody's using this." The other replied, "Maybe not now." Then a pause. "Fresh water bottle," the first one said. Wade looked at me with that hard expression brothers get when an old argument suddenly no longer matters because a newer one has replaced it. We did not need words. The decision tree was already there. Reveal presence and risk confrontation. Stay silent and hope they took what they could see and left. But if they started probing, prying, tearing at the false wall, the inner door would become the only remaining boundary. I called out before they touched the wrong section. "Stop where you are." Silence slammed into the shed. Then Curtis's voice, careful now. "Travis?" "Yes?" "We're not here for trouble." "That is not your decision." The rifleman, Leon, muttered something I could not make out. Curtis spoke louder. "We need food, water, and a safe place. That's all." That's all. The three most expensive things in the world now. "No," I said. Curtis tried reason first. He said they knew me. Said everybody was just trying to get by. Said there were sick people on the road and break-ins west of the county line and nobody could do this alone. He was building a moral bridge toward my door. Every sentence implied that refusing would be the act of a bad man. He was not entirely wrong, but he was still outside, armed, in my structure. "Take 1 gallon from the blue can by the post," I said. "Take the food sack on the floor, then leave." It was more than I had intended to offer, less than they wanted. Leon spoke up then, voice sharp. "If you've got enough to give, you've got enough to share." A sentence has ruined more places than fire ever did. Curtis hissed at him to shut up. Too late. The shape of the visit had changed. "I gave you what I'm giving," I said. "Take it and go." There was a long pause where every possible future balanced on a thread. I had the shotgun ready, but not visible from their angle. Wade had the handgun because I had handed it to him 20 seconds earlier without either of us acknowledging the trust that required. Alyssa was flat against the far wall behind the shelving. Not crying, not speaking. Good kid. Curtis must have understood the geometry better than Leon did. He gathered the gallon and the food sack. Leon kicked a crate in frustration but backed out with him. At the door, Curtis stopped. "You can't hide forever," he said. He meant it as warning, maybe as resentment, maybe both. "I don't need forever," I said. They left. We stayed still 5 full minutes after their footsteps faded because second mistakes often follow first departures. Then I did a measured external check through alternate angles. Clear for the moment. Wade let out a breath and set the handgun down on the bench carefully. "That's done now." He was right. Once armed men know a place is occupied and defended, the fiction of anonymity is gone. That afternoon we worked like a team without discussing why. Reinforced the false wall. Moved some stores deeper. Shifted fallback supplies to a crawlspace compartment below the bunk platform. Prepared 1 rapid exit bag each. Reviewed silent signals. Reviewed who moves where if the outer bay is compromised. Not because we plan to fight, because plans reduce panic. At dusk, while Alyssa logged radio snippets, Wade and I sat by the open inner door to catch what little air moved through the screened vestibule. It was the first quiet moment we had shared without friction since he arrived. He said, "I should have come before things got this bad." I laughed once without humor. "For what? A family reunion?" "For an apology." That was not what I expected. I turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the dark shed opening. "About Mama. About all of it, really. There are times when the thing you wanted to hear for years finally arrives, and you discover it does not fix much because the years are still there." I was not exactly easy either, I said. You were easy, he replied. You were right, that's worse. That got a real laugh out of me, small as it was. He nodded toward the shelter interior. This place is solid, you did good. It was supposed to be for one. And now it isn't. No. He was quiet. Then he said, maybe that's also good. I did not answer because I still did not know. The next days tightened everything. More distant gunshots than before, though in rural Georgia, a gunshot never tells you much by itself. Smoke columns here and there. Fewer voices on open channels. More coded language among local groups who had organized their own small circles and no longer trusted open communication. I picked up enough to understand that some churches had become stable enclaves and some had failed badly. A few farms were holding because extended families and heavy equipment gave them a defensive advantage. Small towns were a patchwork. Some blocks calm, some impossible. Roads shifted from useful to deadly by rumor alone. Alyssa proved invaluable with radio logging and observation. Wade repaired 2 things I had assumed were permanent headaches. I taught both of them basic wound cleaning, water treatment math, and why batteries hate heat. We started eating together on something like a schedule instead of just passing food around. Human beings rebuild normality even when normality has no right to exist. Then Alyssa made the mistake that nearly broke us. She left a signal. It was tiny. Not a bonfire, not a cloth on a pole, nothing dramatic, just 3 reflective glints arranged near the old field edge where sunlight could catch them from the road at the right hour. A desperate little code. I only noticed because I was walking a check line after a storm and one flash hit my eye wrong. I took them down and knew immediately what they were. Back inside, I placed the pieces on the table. Metal from an emergency blanket, cut and weighted with pebbles. Alyssa saw them and went pale. Wade looked from her to me and understood before she spoke. I just wanted... She stopped, started again. I wanted my mother to know I might be here. The room got very quiet. In a different world, that sentence would have been heartbreak only. In ours, it was also a security breach. I asked one question. How many days? 2. Did you put them out both days? She nodded, tears starting now, not because I was yelling, I was not, but because she knew exactly what she had done. Wade moved first, not toward me, toward her. Hey. I held up a hand for him to stop because if he comforted her before we addressed it, the lesson would disappear into sympathy. This cannot happen again, I said, keeping my voice flat. Do you understand what one person seeing that could do? She whispered, yes. No, say it. She swallowed hard. It could bring people here. It could kill all of us, I said, including the person you hope to help. That landed hard. She started crying for real then, quietly, trying not to make noise. Wade looked like he wanted to hit me and hug her at the same time. Maybe both were deserved. But rules hidden under kindness still need to be rules. I sent her to the bunk corner to calm down and kept Wade back. You were too hard, he said. I was not hard enough. She gambled the shelter. She's 16. And 16-year-olds can still get people killed. The second I said it, I hated how true and how cruel it sounded. That night, none of us slept well. Morning made things worse before they got better. Alyssa came to me before breakfast and apologized in a way that told me she had actually thought it through. Not just sorry she got caught. Sorry she had endangered the group. That mattered. I apologized too, though less cleanly. I told her I understood why she did it. I did. Wanting one impossible thing from the old world is still wanting. Survival does not erase family. After that, she never broke a security rule again. 3 days later, we found out the signal might have mattered for reasons none of us expected. Near noon, a woman's voice called from the west tree line. Not loud, smart. She did not move closer than the outer marker I had hidden in brush, and which only someone paying close attention would notice. She called Alyssa's name once. Then again. Alyssa went white. I went to observation while Wade gripped the bench edge so hard his knuckles showed. The woman standing out there looked mid-30s, exhausted, carrying a backpack and a length of broom handle sharpened into a crude spear. Not healthy, not visibly fevered, not unstable, just worn down beyond dignity. She called again. Alyssa whispered, "That's my mom." I believed her immediately because faces answered each other. Everything I had built, argued, and compromised about crashed into one moment so cleanly it almost felt staged by some hateful intelligence. The girl's mother had found the area, maybe from the signal, maybe by luck, maybe by following tracks from places Wade and Alyssa had already passed through. There she was, real, close, alive. Wade turned to me. He did not say please. He did not need to. I should tell you I made the noble choice at once. I did not. I hesitated. I calculated. Exposure risk, unknown health status, another mouth, another emotional variable, another person with every understandable reason in the world to tell someone else later where safety had once existed. Then I looked at Alyssa. The worst thing about hard rules is not that they are hard. It is that sometimes they stay hard even when your soul knows the context has changed. I took the temperature scanner, gloves, a water bottle, and dressings. I opened the outer section under armed watch and met the woman halfway between the shed and tree line. Her name was Carla Bennett. She moved like a woman who had not sat properly in days. Her left palm was torn and wrapped badly. She had a shallow cut above one eye and a limp that seemed more fatigue than injury. Questions first, symptoms first, contact history, fever, bite exposure, all of it. She answered clearly. No obvious red flags beyond exhaustion and dehydration. When I told Alyssa to come out only after Carla checked clear, the sound that came out of that girl did more damage to my rule than any argument Wade ever made. Not because it was loud, because it was relief so complete it made every solitary justification I had built seem smaller than I wanted them to be. Carla cried. Alyssa cried. Wade looked away to give them privacy. I stood there with a thermometer in one hand and a shotgun on a sling, feeling like the most heavily armed witness to a family moment in the history of Georgia. Carla did not beg to come inside. That is what undid me further. She thanked me for the water. She thanked me for keeping Alyssa alive. She said if I only had enough for the girl, she understood. People who ask least are the hardest to refuse. We brought her in. The shelter had now become exactly what I had sworn it never would. A refuge whose survival depended not on one man's discipline, but on 4 people trusting each other enough to remain disciplined together. And yet, after Carla came in, something changed for the better. She brought not supplies or tactical skill, but steadiness. The kind adults who have kept children fed through bad years often do. She reorganized part of the food prep without asking in a way that annoyed me for 20 minutes, and then improved efficiency for the next month. She made Alyssa sleep longer. She got Wade to admit when his side still hurt. She listened more than she spoke, which in a confined shelter is a gift. She also asked me, on her second evening inside, why I built a place like this with a rule like that. I told her the truth. Because crowds fail. Because I had seen people do desperate things. Because one bad decision about entry can erase all prior preparation. Because I was not trying to save the world. I was trying to preserve one functioning point inside it. She nodded and said, "That makes sense." I felt oddly defensive. "You disagree?" "I think it made sense when you were alone," she said. "Now it's a different rule." That bothered me because she was right, and because I did not know what the new rule should be. Unlimited mercy gets everybody killed. Pure exclusion turns you into a machine that survives without deserving to. Somewhere between those two lies an answer, but it is not a clean one. We did not get much time to enjoy improved balance. A week later, the shelter faced its worst night. It began with dogs barking in the distance, then stopping all at once. Then an engine far off, cut quickly. Then nothing, which was the most worrying part. Noise tells you direction. Silence tells you intent. I woke everyone without words. Positions. Lights out. No movement beyond assigned spots. Minutes stretched, then a scrape against the outer shed wall. Another. Then whispered voices. More than two this time. Curtis had come back, and he had not come with only Leon. I could not make out every word, just enough. Here. I told you. Quiet. Backside. Check under. Not raiders in a movie, not chanting maniacs. Just men making bad decisions in low voices while standing too close to what mattered most in my life. We held until the first pry hit the outer siding. Then I called out sharp and clear that the place was occupied and they needed to leave. Somebody outside cursed. Another voice I did not know said they only wanted supplies. Lies always start that way. A different man began working at something near the false wall section. Maybe not knowing exactly what he had, but sure there was more than scrap in there. I warned once. Then came a cracking sound as wood under strain began to give. I will not dress up what happened next. There was shouting. More than one person running. One blast from outside that hit sheet metal and showered rust flakes into the outer bay. And one response from my side that ended the advance long enough for the group outside to realize this would cost more than they wanted to pay. It was chaos measured in seconds, not minutes. The kind of violent confusion that leaves your hands steady during it and shaking afterward. When it was over, the men outside retreated into the dark with angry voices trailing away through the pines. Nobody inside the shelter was physically harmed. The outer structure was damaged. One support post splintered. Siding holed. False wall partially exposed, but not enough to reveal the full system. We held. Alyssa was pale, but composed. Carla put a hand on her shoulder and kept it there. Wade sat down hard against the inner wall after the adrenaline bled off, breathing like his ribs had turned to wire again. I stood there listening for a second attack that did not come. That was the night I understood the final cost of my original rule. The rule had not been wisdom or cowardice alone. It had been both. Wisdom, because secrecy and firm boundaries had given me a chance when chance was rare. Cowardice, because the rule also let me avoid the burden of deciding who I wanted to be after survival stopped being theoretical. Alone, I could call every refusal practical. With other people in the shelter, I had to own my choices as moral choices too. After the attack, we changed everything. At dawn, we abandoned the idea that the place could remain indefinitely hidden. Instead, we leaned into defense by obscurity and mobility. Cache split. Go bags finalized. Alternate hide site prepared near the creek cut with enough supplies for 48 hours. Outer tracks falsified to suggest departure in one direction. More noise discipline. Less radio use. We were no longer one man hiding. We were a small unit trying not to become a target. It was Wade who suggested the next move. "There's a cattle property south of here," he said. "Used to belong to the Dorseys. High fencing, pond, diesel tank, machine shed. If anybody's still holding organized in this county, it'll be families like that." In the old days, I would have dismissed that as Wade chasing rumor. But now, our situation had shifted. Static defense attracts repeat visitors. Connection, if chosen carefully, can become a survival multiplier. That is the arithmetic I had refused to do because it offended my original doctrine. Carla agreed cautiously. Alyssa said nothing, but I could see she wanted a future bigger than one room under dirt and tin. I wanted that for her too, though I had not admitted it aloud. We spent 2 days observing, listening, and planning. On the third day, just before sunrise, Wade and I went on foot while Carla and Alyssa stayed secure. We moved through pines, ditch lines, and old field edges, taking long routes, checking sign, avoiding open roads. Rural Georgia in crisis is still beautiful in mean ways. Red clay, kudzu swallowing fence rows, morning fog over low spots. A hawk circling above land where people were busy ruining one another's lives over canned food and fuel. The Dorsey property turned out to be real and occupied, not a fantasy refuge. A working defensive homestead with about 11 people, 3 related households, controlled entry, watch positions, and a level of suspicion that made mine look welcoming. They did not point guns at us immediately, which counted as progress. They did make us wait at distance while one older woman questioned us with the precision of a tax auditor and the emotional warmth of a prison wall. That older woman, Ruth Dorsey, ended up being one of the most competent people I met after the outbreak began. Former school bus driver, widow, no nonsense. She asked about injuries, numbers, skills, fuel, water, medical knowledge, location, recent threats, and whether our group understood the meaning of contributing instead of merely arriving. I answered honestly except for the exact position of the shelter. That I kept broad. Hidden family land north side of county. She noticed the omission and did not press. She respected boundaries because she had her own. When I told her I was a paramedic, her expression changed by maybe 5%. In Ruth Dorsey, that was enormous enthusiasm. They had 1 retired nurse practitioner, 1 mechanic, 2 strong teenage boys, several adults with farming experience, and security problems growing by the week. They had food production potential and manpower but limited medical depth and no easy access to advanced supplies. We had the opposite. It was the first truly complementary exchange I had seen since the world went bad. Wade walked back beside me after that meeting with a look I had not seen on him in years. Hope, maybe, or at least purpose. We did not join the Dorseys immediately. That is the detail people like to skip in stories. Real trust takes stages. We began with trade and information. Dressings for diesel filter stock, antibiotics from my personal reserves for fresh eggs, and a solar charge controller they no longer needed. Practical value first, sentiment later. Over the next 2 weeks, the line between our shelter and their property became a cautious bridge. Not open, not casual, managed. And in that time, my rule finally broke for good and became something else. The new rule was not everybody gets in. That would have been suicidal and dishonest. The new rule became this: nobody gets in without risk. But some risks are worth carrying if everyone inside accepts the cost. Survival alone is cleaner. Survival with others is messier, louder, and morally harder. It is also more human. I wish I could tell you that lesson came with peace. It did not. There were still refusals. Still, people we turned away with water and directions but no entry. Still nights I lay awake hearing voices from months earlier. Dale Mercer at the tailgate. Curtis in the supply store parking lot. The family on the county road. The school on the radio. Every choice stayed with me. Realistic survival is not about becoming comfortable with hard decisions. It is about continuing after they have changed you. By the first cool spell of fall, our shelter had shifted from fortress to fallback site. Carla spent more time at the Dorsey place helping in the cook shed and with children there. Alyssa learned to mend fencing and log medical inventories better than some adults I used to work with. Wade split his labor between our site and theirs, and somewhere in that routine we became brothers again, Not because the past vanished, but because present usefulness earned new ground under old resentment. One evening, sitting outside the Dorsey's machine shed after a day of patching a generator fuel line, Wade handed me a cup of bad coffee and said, "You know you were never going to stay alone in that hole forever." I nearly did. "Yeah," he said, "that's what I'm saying." I knew what he meant. My shelter had saved me because I built it early, built it well, and enforced a rule when rules still mattered. It would have ruined me if I had treated that first version of the rule as sacred after the facts changed. Preparedness without adaptation becomes another kind of delusion. The last time I slept alone in the shelter, months after the outbreak began, it felt different from the first night. Less like control, more like history. I lay on the bunk, listened to the quiet hum of the vent fan and the occasional tick of cooling metal, and ran my hand over the legal pad where my first inventory lists still sat under newer notes. At the top of one old page in my own handwriting were the words I had once believed would keep me alive. "No one else gets in." I looked at them for a long time. Then I crossed them out. Not because the world had become safe, not because strangers had become trustworthy, not because my original fear had been foolish. I crossed them out because the sentence was too simple for the reality we had survived into. The world, after the outbreak, did not reward softness, but it did not spare emptiness either. A locked door can preserve your pulse. It cannot, by itself, preserve your soul. That may sound cleaner than life ever is. So let me end plainly. I built a shelter on family land in rural Georgia because I believed the first duty in a collapse was to create one place that could hold. I was right about that. I made a rule that no one else would ever enter because I believed one weak exception would destroy the whole system. I was partly right about that too. Then my injured brother arrived with a 16-year-old girl who was not mine to save and not mine to abandon. Later, her mother found us. Later, armed men came. Later, we made common cause with people I once would have treated as a threat by default. Every step after that cost something. Some costs were supplies, some were security, some were sleep. The biggest cost was certainty. I lost the certainty that survival can be solved like a blueprint. I lost the certainty that isolation is always strength. I lost the certainty that refusing people keeps your hands clean. But I kept the shelter. I kept my brother. Alyssa kept her mother. And because we chose carefully instead of blindly, we kept enough of ourselves to become useful to others without letting them consume us. That is the version I can live with. Not a hero story, not a martyr story, not a fantasy about one hard man with one hard rule. Just the truth as I saw it from behind a locked inner door in Twiggs County, Georgia, while the world outside learned how quickly a human life can shrink to water, trust, noise in the trees, and the question of who you will be when someone knocks. And if you ask me now whether the rule was wisdom or cowardice, I would tell you it was wisdom at first, cowardice when I clung to it too long, and mercy when I finally let it change. In a disaster, every option has a cost. The trick is choosing the cost you can still recognize yourself after paying. That is what the shelter taught me. Not how to hide. How to decide. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.